Thanks, Las Kieran Corla. I'm very happy to move People Before Profit's motion for the nationalisation of the energy sector. We are facing a double crisis at the moment. On the one hand, we have an immense cost of living crisis, with people facing soaring fuel costs, electricity costs, food and housing costs. 1 in 2 families are facing into this winter into a situation of energy poverty. We find that just a few weeks before Christmas that energy poverty has rocketed to an unprecedented 40% of households in the state, and despite all the fanfare of the budget, the inadequate one-off measures were nowhere near enough. On the other side, we have the ecological crises, both climate and biodiversity breakdown. You look at the floods in Pakistan, the droughts in China, the heat waves that we experienced in the US and in Europe over the course of the summer. You look at the hundreds of thousands of people facing imminent death through starvation as a consequence of climate change in the Horn of Africa, and you look at the dismal failure of COP once again. The window to achieve a livable future for humanity continues to rapidly close. And both of those crises, they're two sides of the same coin. That coin is a system of ecocidal capitalism which is driven by profit at all cost, without regard for the human misery of people being unable to afford to heat their homes or to feed their families, and without regard to the impact they are having on the planet that we all have to live on and attempt to have a sustainable life on. And immense profits are being made. Let's be under no illusion about that. Obviously, the biggest profits are taking place at an international level, the major fossil fuel corporations. You can go and compare the profits that the big corporations, big oil and gas companies made in Q2 of this year compared to Q2 of last year. They've exploded. Shell, 11.5 billion second quarter of this year versus 5 billion of last year. ExxonMobil, 18 billion this 1 quarter of this year, 4 times what they got previously. Last year, Chevron, 10 billion, a tripling. So massive profits being made by the oil and gas giants on an international level. But that profiteering is also taking place in this country. In the first 6 months of this year, the ESB made a profit of €390 million. Bord Gáis Energy recorded a 74% rise in profits in the first half of this year to €39.5 million. Its parent company, Centrica, which also owns British Gas in the UK, made operating profits of €1.3 billion in the second quarter, mostly from its oil and gas drilling division. SSE, Electricity's parent company, SSE, their pre-tax profits rose 44% in the year to March, €3.5 billion. Just 3 multi-millionaires control the Irish prepay energy market and are allowed by this government to rip off some of the most deprived people in the state. Ulrich Kenny and Andrew Collins are on the Irish rich list and own prepay power, while Pinergy, which has just announced yet another round of price increases, is owned by multi-billionaire Peter Coates with a personal wealth of over £8 billion. I could go on and on about the immense profiteering that is going on. Yesterday, Minister Eamon Ryan said he can't foresee any significant reduction in household gas or electricity bills for the next year or two. That's incredible. What incredible news to give people before Christmas. We can't accept that as a society, that people are going to be left in these horrendous positions of having to choose between heating or eating, and some dying as a consequence, as we see in the figures for excess deaths in winter in this country. We should act now. And we were the first, it's over a year ago now, to bring in a motion to the Dáil to say the government should use the powers that it has to bring in price controls on energy. And the government has that power. They can do it with 2 strokes of a pen under the consumer protection legislation. We think that absolutely has to happen. But we're also making the point that that by itself will be inadequate. If you leave control of the energy market in the private system, well then introducing price controls will only be achievable on the basis of writing a blank cheque to the private energy companies, as for example the Tories did. You cannot control what you don't own. So therefore, we need to bring the energy sector into public ownership, run it on the basis of people's needs as opposed to profit. And the reason for that, it's clear in terms of the cost of living crisis, but it's also very, very clear in relation to the climate crisis. We have a progress towards being carbon neutral at an extremely slow pace. It's a snail's pace. Over the last 20 years, a grand total of 7 offshore wind turbines have been developed. 87% of our total energy use continues to come from fossil fuels, 70% of it from imported fossil fuels. The emissions, despite all the talk, Ireland's emissions continue to rise. So it's fundamentally time to change that script. Almost 100 years ago, when the country was far poorer than it is today, and the state was still in its infancy, it established the ESB, a publicly owned, not-for-profit company that electrified the whole state and provided low-cost, affordable electricity to millions. That situation continued until the so-called liberalisation of the energy market in the 1990s and the 2000s. It was very simple. The ESB provided everyone with low-cost electricity. It had a non-profit mandate. It was actually barred by law from making profits in order to keep prices low for households, and prices remained among the lowest in Europe for decades. That process of liberalisation and reality privatisation, which was an international process of neoliberalism, was a disaster everywhere. Everywhere it led to profits for a series of very rich corporations and individuals, decline in terms of workers' rights and conditions, significant increases, soaring prices. We went from some of the cheapest prices in Europe to some of the most expensive prices in Europe, and a huge slowness to invest in renewable energy because the for-profit companies simply didn't want to take the risk. So it is time to renationalise our energy system. The idea is gaining ground internationally as the only way to address the climate and cost of living crises and make the essential changes that we need. It means operating the energy sector as a not-for-profit public utility under the democratic control of workers and communities. It means driving the electrification of all aspects of the economy, a just transition to 100% renewable energy and reductions in energy usage. To get to zero emissions, we need to electrify everything using cheap renewable energy, and that is simply not going to happen if we continue to rely on private companies to do it, no matter how many incentives, no matter how many more price increases they get. What we propose in terms of how the nationalisation of the energy system would take place is 5 steps. Firstly, reintegrate the ESB group and operate it on a not-for-profit mandate. Under the current legislation, the ESB is not allowed to use the profits it makes from generation to subsidise the price. It should be brought back into one integrated entity. It should be reinstated with a not-for-profit mandate, with the addition of a mandate to deliver a rapid programme of electrification of all possible sectors of the economy, a rapid and just transition to renewable energy and low-cost electricity for households. By Electric Ireland then offering affordable electricity on a not-for-profit basis, customers will be encouraged to leave the much more expensive private electricity supply companies. All workers in those companies should be guaranteed a quality green job within the ESB group. Secondly, nationalise the major private electricity generators. Electricity generation is too important to be left in private hands. They should be nationalised and integrated into the ESB group, including the nationalisation of the Corrib gas field. The government already has the power to do it under the Fuel Control of Supplies Acts of 1971 and 1982. There must be no question of compensating the private energy companies and their millionaire owners who have engaged in rampant profiteering and destruction of the environment. Non-renewable generation should be shut down as soon as possible on the basis of energy reductions and the development of renewables. Thirdly, transform the Commission for Regulation of Utilities into a people's power energy with a mandate not to promote competition but to ensure the delivery of affordable electricity. Fourthly, reduce energy usage throughout the economy by prioritising people's needs over corporate profits. Let's reject this drive of more and more data centres. Let's invest in public transport. Let's invest in retrofitting of people's homes. And fifthly, to recognise renewable power as a natural resource. This is a natural resource for this country. It should only be developed publicly. We need to get on the streets on Saturday, join the Cost of Living Coalition, protest at 1 o'clock, fight for a left government, but not just any left government, a left government that will actually take on these issues by committing to nationalising the energy sector. Thanks.